I will, when I get to that session, I'll invite her first, yes.
Make sure your mic's on.
How do you know it's on? Yeah, I think it's on. So I would like to welcome you to the fall breast committee meeting on behalf of Priyanka Sharma, my co-chair, and myself. So we have, I hope, a really interesting and useful set of information for you to share, and a terrific mini symposium. I'd like to thank Andrew Godman for putting together the mini symposium for this meeting. So Andrew organized this around improving diversity in clinical trial accrual and bridging gaps in creating opportunities. So I would like to give the podium to Andrew to introduce our speakers.
Can we go ahead and switch over to our slides now? There, that's better. Okay, we're going to go to this. Oh, it's the nanometer talking to me. I love it. Oh, it's probably in the web-based. There we go. Okay, we're ready to go? Okay. This is going to be a multimedia approach. So as I indicated at some of my previous meetings, we are going to encourage you have your phones and computers out, not during necessarily all the talks, but when we get to the interactive questions. So it really is my pleasure to be able to introduce our speakers today. And we are going to talk about ways to kind of improve diversity in clinical trials. So we're really looking at this point for some feedback from you, but you're also going to hear a variety of different opinions. And so kind of getting on the same page here, each institute I know is addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everybody has a different approach to this, and I'm showing what we're doing at the University of Kansas Medical Center. So when we talk about inclusion, just so we're kind of on the same page, we're talking about the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. In regard to equity, the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people according to their circumstances. And then diversity, the state of being in which all human differences are valued and incorporated into the fabric of our community. So what you're going to hear today is a few different opinions towards this. And our first speaker today is going to be Gayatri Nagaraj, who is the clinical educator and serves as the Heme Onc Fellowship Program Director at Loma Linda University. She's been serving as the principal investigator for the Institute for various SWOG and other cooperative and industrial-led trials since 2012. As you can see here, her research interest includes healthcare disparity and healthcare delivery. And just to remind everybody, she is our DEI champion for our breast committee. So I'm going to welcome Gayatri up to give her overview towards improving diversity in clinical trials, why, what, and how.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm honored and humbled to be presenting this important topic in front of this elite crowd. I have no conflicts of interest. So it's important to address three important aspects of improving diversity in clinical trials. So why is diversity important? What is the current status of diversity and representativeness in our clinical trials, and how do we improve? Now, I think this is an obvious statement that equitable access to research is important to achieve cancer health equity. And clinical trials are integral to high quality cancer care, and every patient should have access to clinical research. I would be stating again the obvious that minority communities are underrepresented in clinical trials. Underrepresentation of people from racial ethnic minorities, especially Hispanic and Black communities, have been reported in multiple trials, including multiple SWOG studies. Now, why is it important? Now, enrollment of minorities and underserved in clinical trials are required for broad applicability of our clinical trials results. especially with changing demography of our country. Now, it affects clinical decision-making. Patient, providers, and payers must be confident of the findings reported to rapidly adopt new standards of care across diverse patient population. It's also important to improve our understanding of disparate outcomes among diverse group of patients, including race, ethnicity, geography, sexual orientation, gender identity, socio-demographic factors, and others. Now, this graph here represents our current enrollment to breast cancer studies by race and ethnicity. These are some of the recent studies. As you can see, recruitment by race and ethnicity varies across different studies. The bottom row shows an average of recruitment for all these studies. Now, how do we perform compared to the US cancer population? Now, this is a study, again, from SWOG investigators who looked at the proportion of Black patients by research setting and for US cancer population. Now, this study cohort included publication results from trials that led to FDA drug approvals from 2008 to 2018. As you can see, SWOG trials performed better compared to pharmaceutical studies, pharmaceutical-sponsored studies. However, there is room for improvement compared to the US cancer population overall. Now, this shows a proportion of Black patients by research setting and for US cancer population for common cancers. Again, compared to the US cancer population, there is room for improvement in breast cancer, lung cancer, and prostate cancer. Now, this graph on the left, where you could see 7.4% enrollment from SWOG trials, compare this to 9% that was shown in the graph that I shared initially for the most recent trials. But again, we have made improvement, but there is still room for meaningful opportunities. So what are the important barriers for clinical trial participation? As you all understand, barriers exist at multiple levels. At the level of the clinician, barriers such as personal biases, limited time and resources, lack of awareness, patient-level barriers such as lack of information and awareness, barriers related to social determinants of health, financial barriers, distrust, personal beliefs, language, communication, and health-related literacy. Trial barriers include restrictive eligibility criteria, onerous participation requirements, numerous trial visits, frequent laboratory tests and biopsies, institution-level barriers such as location of trials, lack of diversity of research and support staff, available trials not reflecting the patient population served. Hence, interventions to address these multiple barriers should also include multiple stakeholders at different levels. And these include the research team, clinicians, patients, institutions, patient advocacy organization, regulatory bodies, trial sponsors, and professional organizations. Now, this is the methodology that was developed at SWOG to improve clinical representativeness in clinical trials. Most of my remaining talk is going to be focused on this aspect of protocol development and implementation, where we can do better. Now, as you can see, there is multiple strategies that can be involved at different stages of clinical protocol development. And I will be reviewing some of these important strategies in the next few slides. The most important first step is to build a research team with diversity and representative expertise. So involve stakeholders who share values, beliefs, and interest. Start early, calibrate and clarify roles. Effective and efficient engagement of the team is necessary. The team should advocate for diversity and representativeness, and this should start early again. And we should be analyzing portfolio earlier on and identifying gaps going forward. Now, the next important step in protocol development is creating forecasts for subpopulations of interest. Now, on the left-hand side is our current state of forecast, building forecast, and the left-hand side and the right-hand side is the recommendations to improve upon it. So currently, forecasting is done once per protocol development. However, this could be an iterative process starting early before a final rigorous forecasting is done. Responsibility currently lies on the biostatistician. However, this could again be a team approach. Subpopulation table is actually more based on the prior SWOG experience. However, the forecasting could be done to mirror the subpopulations within the study population. It could be aggressive and achievable. Subpopulation analysis is done at the final analysis, and study enrollment is not monitored per forecasted table. However, this can be improved upon by monitoring progress throughout the study and holding accountable for the forecast made. Now, the next step is, after creating a forecast for subpopulation, is to discuss barriers and brainstorm solutions. Now, as discussed previously, barriers come at different levels, be it the design, the trial design, the cost, logistics, frequency of visits, language, health literacy, etc. It's important to ask advocates and patient communities to give feedback on protocol content, brainstorm potential countermeasures with patient advocates, site resources, and DEI experts. The most important barrier in practice is financial barriers to clinical trial participation. It's estimated that 20 to 40% of adult patients with cancer report financial hardship, and this leads to detrimental effects that's reported throughout the cancer care continuum, including increased mortality, poor quality of life, reduced medication compliance, decreased engagement in healthcare decisions, and willingness to enroll in clinical trials. Patients incur direct medical costs, ancillary costs, and indirect costs. Now, ASCO has put forth recommendations to address financial barriers. Similarly, multiple professional organizations are coming up with similar solutions to address these important barriers. These are some of ASCO's recommendations: to improve payer clinical trial coverage policies, provide clear, transparent information about potential trial-related patient out-of-pocket costs, remove impediment to ethically appropriate financial compensation, and incentivize research around identifying and mitigating financial trial-associated hardships. Now, taking this into account, we should consider supplemental funding to deliver representativeness in our clinical trials. We should identify these early and consider additional funding through additional mechanisms or philanthropic organizations, additional grants, and so forth. And funding can be considered for these below resources, such as compensation to sites for enrolling representative population, culturally calibrated patient materials, creative photography, videography, infography, transportation, parking, meals, lodging, cost of medical copays and deductibles, outreach to and continued engagement of community clinicians and organizations. The next step in the protocol development that's key to improving representativeness is inclusion-exclusion criteria. Now, eligibility criteria must be as broad and safe as possible to achieve diverse and representative population and to reflect the real-world patient population. We should avoid creating implicit bias disproportionately affecting underserved populations, and broaden eligibility criteria. For this, ASCO, FDA, in collaboration with ASCO and Friends of Cancer, have put forth recommendations, and this has been adapted into the new template for NCI-sponsored clinical trials. And some of these highlights are, as noted here. This includes organ function assessment with some room. For example, cardiac function being NYHA 2B or better, liver function using the institutional upper limit of normal rather than a set cutoff, eGFR being 50 and above, use of concomitant medications to only exclude those that has relevant or predicted drug-drug interactions or potential overlapping toxicities. While using laboratory values, consider normal variations due to race and ethnicity. Also consider increasing intervals between protocol-specified tests to reduce patient burden. Include ECOG performance status 2 in addition to 0 and 1, unless there are some safety concerns in earlier phase studies. and do not exclude patients with psychiatric illness and social situations. So once you have your protocol developed, you need, I think as trialists, we need to come up with an accrual plan by subpopulation. And this is the next important step for clinical investigators to select and solicit sites based on subpopulation. Site mix should be calibrated with study progress. Patient outreach and related materials should be culturally sensitive and reflect the subpopulations of local communities. Accrual plans must be flexible and modified as needed to meet the accrual goals. During the implementation phase, it's again important to check accrual progress and develop countermeasures. Now, this is an important consideration for the clinical investigators to consider closing accrual to subpopulations that have met accrual goals for that group. Now, this is a statistical phenomena called stratum closure that can be considered and has been used by other cooperative groups. Countermeasures could include reaching out to new sites with demographics that align with your gaps in accrual, identify and mitigate barriers, and get feedback from clinicians, sites, and patients about the potential problems with accrual. And reach out to experts. So reaching out to experts can help ensure that trial meets its goal for representativeness. They can help analyze your accrual data and advise on how to engage specific populations, determine appropriate plans, and create a process, and along with coaching your team in various ways, your experts can help you with your implementation plan. So the final step from a clinical protocol development and implementation is sharing results from your clinical research. Now, sharing results is important to patient participants and survivor communities. It's important to develop audiences, media, and messaging for sharing data. This helps improve awareness of clinical research and willingness to participate. And it's important to decide who, where, and what message is going to be conveyed, and additional resources, if necessary, has to be allocated. And it's important to engage advocacy groups and local media and recognize relevant motivators and knowledge that needs to be shared. So SWOG is committed towards its DEI in clinical research. With the help of the SWOG monitoring, DEI monitoring committee and DEI vice chair are here to support strategic plans for diversity and representativeness of clinical trial participants. DEI champions us under the mentorship of our DEI fellow, Dr. Robinson, are here to guide committees and leaderships within their areas of focus. We have additional responsibilities, but one important responsibility is also to improve and disseminate DEI methods and values across SWOG, which I hope I have accomplished in my talk today. And I look forward to working with all the protocol stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take questions and answers at the very end of our symposium here. So this is where I'm hoping it's going to work. We have 41 people online. We have a big group here. Please log on to www.menti.com, and you're going to go and enter that code. And the first thing you're going to do, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is enter your superpower. And if you're doing it on a phone, you will have to scroll to the bottom and hit submit. So don't forget to hit submit. And it should show up in real time. And there we go. Somebody's got it. There we go. So I'm hoping to see about 80 to more plus here. So we're going to use this information for further learning and discussion and potentially reporting. So your feedback's going to be very valuable. So I hope everybody online and in the room can participate. The questions do get a lot tougher, just so you know. And unlike Priyanka, I don't have a time limit. So I hope that people can do this. We're up to about 30. Okay, we're getting there.
No one considers humor as their superpower yet.
That is interesting, isn't it? We're all very serious, I guess, here. Okay. Now, the questions do get progressively harder, but I do want to, it's really thoughtful responses that we would like you to do. So the next one is, we just want to get an idea of where you work. Again, you can still enter that code up there, but as you can see, NCI designated cancer center, academic cancer center, hospital associated cancer center, community, in freestanding practice, veterans affair, other. Okay, we're getting a good baseline. We have, oh, good, we're getting more responses, super. All right. Okay, does your site provide diversity, equity, inclusion training? Yes, optional, yes, mandatory, no, I don't know. And we're getting good at this, thank you. I really appreciate that. All right. Oh, we're still going up, okay. Next question. Have you or your site not offered a clinical trial to a patient due to concerns of presumed barriers? Yes, no, I don't know. And again, this is really, we want very candid responses to this, because we're trying to address, oh, yeah, I was gonna say we lost screen there. Now you think these are easy ones, now we're gonna get really hard, just so you know. Oh, good, we're continually over 50 here, thank you. Okay. Now, wow, you're gonna see lots of choices. This is all check all that apply. What tiers of barriers most impact your site's clinical trial enrollment among minorities and underrepresented populations? And so you'll see a number of ones based on clinicians, institute, trial sponsors, patients. We don't have barriers. We do not offer clinical trials or other. And again, this is multiple, you can enter multiple answers for your center. Excellent. Okay, we've got about 10 more to go. Come on, folks. This is, appreciate your input and thoughtfulness in this. One more, let's get to 50. Come on. There we go, thank you, okay. Okay, what strategies do you or your site use to increase clinical trial participation among minorities and underserved communities? Oh, I thought I had this, not as a bar graph anymore. Monitor enrollment, require recruitment plans, dedicated budget for recruitment, extend trials to community providers, engage patient research partners, patient navigators, workforce diversity, expand hours, expand eligibility criteria, review reasons patients decline, other, nothing. And again, very candid responses are appreciated here, and you can enter all that apply. And I do want to really thank, we have a committee that worked together to come up with these questions, so I really appreciate the help that they did over a period of time when we were trying to create this. Again, thank you. We got 50 responses, 51, great. Okay, what has your site done to increase clinical trial awareness in underrepresented communities? Again, enter all that apply. Community education events, educating community healthcare providers, social media campaigns, billboards, podcasts, videos to explain clinical trials, newspaper stories. That's great. Oh, this is great. Seeing a lot of, okay. A few more people. Oh, come on, we've got our 6 outliers right now. Don't give up on me yet. Oh, okay. There we go, there's our 46. 47, come on, we're creeping up there. We've got 51 participants. Okay, I don't want to lose you. Okay. 48, thank you. Okay, we'll go to the next here. And this will be our last one, I believe. And this is something actually came up, and this is something we deal with at our cancer center itself. And as a deputy director, we really, in working with our clinical trials office, really think about this quite a bit. How does your site share results from a clinical trial with participants or the public? Direct communication with participants who volunteer to participate in the study through letters, EMR, MyChart. Share what is required on a clinical trial, clinicaltrials.gov. Our PI and IRB determine and communicate strategies, for example, social media, newspapers, annual reports, community newspapers. Work with the patient group on planning and sharing results with the public. Would like to partner with another institute to determine best practice. So, and I think we're seeing a little bit what I expected with the clinicaltrials.gov, which is great. Okay, we're back almost up to our 51. Come on, one more. There they are, thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to review some of this, but you're gonna see that we're gonna address this part of some of these questions in our next talk. And that next talk is by Hope Crable, who you can see is not sitting up here. Hope was actually supposed to moderate this session for me, but she is not available today. But we pre-recorded her talk. So Hope Crable is our executive director for the Masonic Cancer Alliance and our outreach network of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. She's helped develop and launch Pivot, which you'll hear about a little bit in her talk. And she has extensive experience in collaborating with community partners to develop and deliver evidence-based public health interventions and address regional cancer health disparities over 25 years. So with that, I do need help transferring over to her recorded talk. Where did I think I did that?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to talk about some of our efforts.
Get the slides up. Stick with us here. We're about, there we go.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to talk about some of our efforts to improve access to clinical trials at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm so sorry that I'm not here to engage in conversation. In order to place our efforts into context, I'd like to share a bit about our catchment area, which includes the state of Kansas and 18 counties in Missouri. And although we are less diverse in the USA, we have counties, including the county our health system is located in, that are majority minority population. We have 123 counties with 30 considered metropolitan and 93 considered rural. And in fact, you can see the key below the map. The blue represents zip codes of 6 through 9, the more rural communities. To address the large catchment area, we built the Masonic Cancer Alliance as the outreach network of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. In addition to participating in the KU Cancer Center MCA Rural NCOR, we provide professional education and outreach and patient support programs. And to be successful in clinical trial partnerships, we spend time with leadership and individual staff members to really focus on engagement and listening and understanding what their needs are as a community cancer center. In order to infuse patient voices into our research, from the beginning, we co-created and launched Pivot, Patient and Investigator Voices Organizing Together, which is a unique initiative encouraging teamwork between patients and investigators at KU Cancer Center. Today, I plan to focus on multicultural bilingual communications and community engagement strategy that is paid for and with Latino and African American audiences, as well as other diverse populations in our Kansas City region. We engage CEGA Productions, a media production company, who not only has a long history of providing communication resources to the Spanish-speaking and other diverse populations in our region, they also have personal knowledge. The individual.
Sorry, these are not advancing, so I want to wait till they actually get this so it's fixed. You haven't seen the slides that she's been talking about. Since that one slide came up with the green on it, it's been fixed.
So Gayatri, thanks for the great presentation. While we are waiting for switching over, maybe I ask you a question. So have you thought about how to address the issues of comorbidities that are oftentimes really make it difficult to enroll patients in studies because of the extensive and really often poorly controlled and treated comorbid illnesses?
I think that's a great question. I think that's one of the reasons the eligibility criteria has been broadened or modernized to make sure that we avoid these, biases which affect our underrepresented population disproportionately. So the use of concomitant medications. So I didn't go into the detail, but ASCO and Friends of Cancer's 2017 and 2021 recommendations have been adopted by FDA and NCI. And so those specifically address many of these, well-controlled comorbidities, medications that don't necessarily interact with our study medications to allow those, and having cutoff for lab values that has a little room. So those are, things that I think would potentially address some of these concerns in the eligibility.
And
Also, I wonder if we would probably would need to reach out to other constituencies in medicine, right? Because if you have a drug that causes hyperglycemia, you can't really put on patients who actually have really poorly controlled blood sugar. And oftentimes their management would require input from other people within the healthcare system. So I think lifting all the boats would need to be the goal in the comorbidities field, that we somehow loop in our colleagues in other disease specialties.
So also, I want to just, we're in the process of developing a protocol for triple negative breast cancer that is more prevalent in African Americans. So as we were going through the protocol development, one of the criteria that's kind of probably something that's ingrained in SWOG protocol development is once you register, you have to start treatment within a week. And this is a preoperative study. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy, immunotherapy study. And most patients can't start within a week for many reasons: insurance coverage, getting a port, other things arranged to be able to start. And certain groups take longer to start because of social determinants of health or other things that they have to arrange. So we had to kind of put forth an argument saying that 1 week isn't adequate. And really, if we stuck with that, we will exclude certain populations because of that time limit. We got extended to three weeks, and it's medically okay. We're not harming a patient by waiting 3 weeks. That is totally within our standard of care. So there are many things that are kind of ingrained into how protocols have routinely been developed, that I think as we get to those stages, we have to look at them very carefully and address. And the comorbidities, and they have to be balanced against the side effects of the drug. So yes, we want to be inclusive, but we also want to ensure that we're keeping patient safety in mind.
Yeah, so
I think we're going to give it a try again here. I'm sorry, I'm going to start with the beginning. So that you follow the slides there. So we set. What's the next thing? Just advance? Sure.
Through access clinical trials at the University of SWOG. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm so sorry that I'm not here to engage in conversation. In order to place our efforts into context, I'd like to share a bit about our pension area, which includes the state of Kansas and 18 counties in Missouri, and minority population. We have 123 counties, where 30 considered metropolitan and 93 considered rural. And in fact, you can see below the map that blue represents voices 6 through 9, more rural communities. To address the large catchment area, we built the Chronic Cancer Alliance as the outreach network of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. In addition to participating in the KU Cancer Center MCA Rural NCAR, we provide professional education and outreach and patient support programs. And to be successful in clinical trial partnerships, we spend time with leadership and individual staff members to really focus on engagement and listening and understanding what their needs are as a community cancer center. In order to infuse patient voices into our research, from the beginning, we co-created and launched Pivot, Patient and Investigator Voices Organizing Together, which is a unique initiative encouraging teamwork between patients and investigators at KU Cancer Center. Today, I plan to focus on a multicultural, bilingual communications and community engagement strategy dedicated toward and with Latino and African American audiences, as well as other diverse populations in our Kansas City region. We engaged Tico Productions, a media production company, who not only has a long history of providing communication resources to the Spanish-speaking and other diverse populations in our region, they also have personal knowledge. The individual who owns the company has participated in clinical trials through their own cancer diagnosis. We engaged Cancer Center Community Advisory Board members and, of course, Pivot in the development of this campaign. We looked at the research already created and implemented here at KU Cancer Center, and then Tico Productions also engaged the community through surveys in person and through social media. And we found that over 600 people who completed the survey, the majority felt positive about clinical trials. Tico also conducted population-specific community meetings, and we heard messages such as the materials needed to be bilingual, the importance of representation and trust, and that trust could be built through simplifying communication and returning results back to the community. And we can listen to some of those voices from the community at one of the community meetings.
In my experience, most people that I talked to, they weren't even made aware that there were clinical trials that they could qualify for. So the information is not getting to the patients. The only reason why I found out about potential clinical trials was because I asked, but it was never offered.
There's also a lack of understanding and education about clinical trials in these very same communities. So the value that participation in a clinical trial today is not clearly understood. And part of that is, well, if I don't trust you, I'm not going to sit and listen to how this may actually benefit me if I don't trust you. So then the question becomes, who's relaying the information?
While I was going through my cancer treatment, I was hearing about lots of people join clinical trials, but nobody told me anything about it, about different,
That's not the part of it.
Yeah, so it looks like they have some technical issues because of the video embedded in the video.
No, it's not the video, it's their platform.
So we have problems because of the platform then. But this gives us some opportunity to ask, so we could discuss the presentation that Gayatri did. Thank you, Gayatri. Don, I think you raised your hand.
So, one of the things that Tricia Robinson raised in the thoracic meeting I'd like to bring up, because it really does touch on Gayatri's points. The idea of being intentional when you write your clinical trials, I think, is the lens that you can bring in very early, and Roberta's there to certainly speak on that aspect as well. But I think one of the things we might challenge ourselves to do is when we write our introduction to the trials, that's when we should be speaking about the burden of disease, not when we get to the statistics table, which we fill out. This sort of idea of forecasting should be starting at the very beginning, where our investigators, we as investigators, should really look for the data that says, what is the different burdens per the racial and ethnic categories. So when we say, X number of people get breast cancer, we should also include descriptors. 30%, 10% of those are men. This proportion of Black people get triple negative breast cancer, this proportion of Asians, and then that should carry forward, so that we actually understand the population we're trying to serve. So I actually made this as a challenge to the thoracic teams to strongly consider how we actually write the introductions to our protocols. And the other thing is that, just so you know, ASCO has these guidelines, or these summaries of how to approach clinical trials to reduce barriers. The recent one I participated on making was for the sex and gender minoritized communities. And the biggest thing, and for us led the way, I will tell you, was to break the gender cancer stereotype. So for so long, we offered our protocols as, we include men with prostate cancer, or we include women with breast cancer. And that by itself is exclusionary. So again, some things to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing this out. So I think the first part that you said is really interesting. So if I understood correctly, we could just simply fix this by requiring that the clinical trial population reflects the local population. And we actually did a study like this at Yale, where we actually mandated that a certain percentage of the patients have to be African American. So the limitation of this is that the white population completed the study about a year earlier. And then really we had to extend the accrual time by about a year to really meet the 30% African American population that we wanted to accrue to reflect our local neighborhood. So I wonder, we could switch around, maybe can we do that so that we move to...
Well, we're trying to finish.
Are we moving on, or can I comment on this?
You can comment as long as we don't have this up.
I practice in Memphis, Tennessee, and we have
Tell me about
hybrid program.
what happened or why, and
can you just put it on hold? So yeah, finish your comments and then you can go back.
It's an area of focus for us. We've been pretty successful, but we've been pretty successful at lots of movement. We average about 30% of our recruitment of people of color on trials, and we're a relatively large group. It's an area of focus for us. I wanted to just comment on the fact that it's really, it's a lot more than just changing clinical trial inclusion exclusion criteria. I will tell you, in my practice, it does take me a lot longer to convince a patient of color to do a trial than it is a Caucasian patient. And it's a big, and unless physicians and practice are not willing to spend that time to talk to patients, and not only patients, but their family too. I can't tell you the amount of times I talk to a patient about a study, and she wants to go on the study, and she goes home, and she comes back, and she says, my son says,
yeah.
So then we have to extend that conversation to that.
Right, so that's the cultural sensitivity,
really right? And there's a large conversation that can go on here. Just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, I'm gonna try to actually finish this where we were in the, actually some of the patients that we talked with gave me testimonials.
Understanding and education about clinical trials in these very same communities. So the value that participation in a clinical trial today is not clearly understood. And part of that is, well, if I don't trust you, I'm not going to sit and listen to how this may actually benefit me if I don't trust you. So then the question becomes, who's relaying the information?
while I was going through my cancer treatment, I was hearing about lots of people doing clinical trials, but nobody told me anything about it, about different, things that could be done. Or so I would say access to it. Are the medical providers valuing those patients in that area of research?
I was a participant in, it was a research project, and for whatever reason, they stopped the research. And I was not informed about what happened or why. And, are there any adverse effects to why they stopped it? Like, am I in some kind of trouble with this? Now they put this stuff in my body, and what do I know is going to happen next? And so better communication, I guess, would be a good way to summarize that.
I have a friend who was diagnosed with the same type of cancer I was on the same day, and she did a clinical trial, and it wasn't even offered to me.
My experience has been in my community, they have always had to go and seek out the clinical trials and find out about them doing their own research. It wasn't something that was presented to them by someone on their medical team.
Let's face it, we all have biases. We talk to people we're comfortable with talking with, and so this is outside of their comfort zone. Whether it's the research nurse, whether it's the clinical nurse, whether it's the physician, whether it's even the secretary at the front desk or the admin assistant. Where's the level of comfort with talking with outside of who you normally talk to? And we're all guilty of it, but we've got to be more intentional.
Actually having, a two-way communication with educating a person about what these clinical trials are for and what they do, and allowing them to become comfortable. That education piece is just so important. That meant everything to me. The more I learned about different treatments and options that I had, it helped to squash a lot of the fears. And so there's so much fear out there because of the unknown. So if we can find a way to make that unknown become a known, I think that would really be helpful.
So we built a campaign that was focused on fact-based, help make the knowns, the unknowns known. Trusted, your health is personal, you're valued, relational. Language really needed to be approachable, and a call to action, ask, learn, and understand. Our models are survivors and co-survivors of cancer. And we engaged in earned and paid media. We had a Spanish-speaking physician talk on a local station. And as you can see, we engaged multiple locations, such as print ads at specific newspapers, targeted display ads, social media ads. And here's an example of the creative. Isn't it beautiful? Tico did such a wonderful job. And we put up a billboard for a month, and we reached over 1,000 people a day. And we created a clinical trial ad that we want to share with you today.
Clinical trials are how we make advancements in the medical industry, and it's important for us to be engaged.
This is what I would tell someone who's considering a clinical trial. Do it. We need more people to participate in clinical trials to find a cure.
We couldn't get the treatment that we get right now if at some point someone before us did not do a clinical trial.
Clinical trials are so important because it really helps patients in the future that have to have treatment. That way they can have confidence in that they have had the trials that will help them to have their diagnosis being handled in a correct way.
I felt that it was important to participate in a clinical trial so that when a discovery is made, we know that the medicine works the same for me as it would for anyone else.
My health is personal.
My health is personal.
My health is personal.
Medical research needs representation.
Diversity is very important in clinical trials.
Help make the unknowns known.
We used geofencing so that we could get this information out to a variety of people. And geofencing is targeting where people shop, worship, and get health care. And you can see we reached a lot of people. And the click-through rate was 0.20% or higher on laptops, which the industry standard is 0.15%. So we were really happy with the results. We also wanted to reach the audience that we were trying to reach. And from here, you can see that over 70% were under a $75,000 income, and over 65% had less than a bachelor's degree, and were over the age of 45 years old. We do not know for sure about race and ethnicity, but we felt like this at least gave us some information about reaching those who are impacted by cancer. We drove everyone to a landing page for our KU Cancer Center clinical trial campaign. It was important for us to see if it really drove people to learn a bit more. And when the campaign was fully running, it really did work, but it quickly dropped off. And so what we plan on doing is hosting the campaign about 4 times a year to really try to get people to continue to drive to our clinical trial pages so that they can learn about what trials are available at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. So all of this happened with the group, and it was a pleasure to share information about it. I want to specifically thank the clinical trial campaign models, Pivot, who shared the information about what it means to them to be on clinical trials and offer clinical trials, Ashley Spalding, Christine Thomas, and of course, Ron Chen and Tico Productions, who did an amazing job partnering with us. Dr. Ron Chen will be here to help answer any questions, and I look forward to learning about how it goes today. Thank you.
Okay, given the difficulty again with some of the technical issues here, we're going to move on. And if we have time at the end, we'll have Ron join. I need to go back to the meta. Okay, so thank you for your patience with that. What? Yes.
Yeah, so apologies for these technical glitches, and thank you for sticking with us. So far, only half of the room left, and our online participants are all sipping coffee. No, yeah, so.
We actually have good chat going on there, and while that's coming up, I'll just repeat a question that came from Banu Symington, and she's complimenting Hope and her team for a very compelling ad, but also making an observation that we live in America, where seeing the vision of diverse trial participants might actually discourage certain participants not to consider the studies, namely the Caucasian cancer patients, and she noticed that was missing in the ad. So I think we have to be cognizant of including everyone, and consider that observation.
Okay. Our last speaker before we wrap up is going to be Roberta Albany. And so, as you can see there, Roberta is a breast cancer survivor. And while receiving treatment, she noticed there was a huge disconnect in the medical community with regards to care and participation of underserved communities. Roberta made it her passion to bridge the disparity gap in the Black, African American, and person of color communities by providing outreach programs and explaining the importance of clinical trials. Today, she is involved in several organizations to continue to advocate for the cancer community. And Roberta, we want to have you share your real life experiences and some of the opinions you have regarding what you've heard here today. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I'll start off by saying there's plenty of discussion about the barriers to clinical trials. And personally, I just think if we actually be honest about it, the criteria and eligibility requirements what keeps Black Americans out of it, specifically regarding obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. That's just to name a few. Another factor in the medical community, which is a real big factor actually, is that most doctors are not taking the time to ask us to participate in clinical trials. And oftentimes it is due to implicit biases, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And far too many doctors assume that Black patients will not participate in clinical trials because of what has happened to us in the past, and the mistrust of the medical community as well. The biggest example we can take from it is COVID-19. Too many Black Americans and Spanish Americans died from COVID-19, and they were reluctant to take the vaccine because, one, they couldn't understand how the vaccine was developed so fast. Two, when you do not have trust or you don't have people going out into the communities to speak to them about the vaccine and to participate into clinical trials, we're going to continue to have the problems that we're having now. The other issue, I would think, how we can deal with it going forward is to start building relationships and trust in the communities. And what I mean by that is have people that look like those persons that are underrepresented in those communities go out to health events, educate them about clinical trials, even whatever their disease may be. And then once we do the work, then we bring the actual professionals out to help them understand more of what we're talking about. Another suggestion that at my cancer center where I was treated, I hear the excuses, well, I call them excuses, that doctors say they don't have time to ask. Now, the only reason why I knew about a clinical trial is because I was asked by my radiologist, not my oncologist. So just imagine how many people that were missing in that. So I suggest that they wear buttons that say, ask me about clinical trials, since people say that the doctors are saying that they don't have enough time to do what they need to do because they are really being rushed. So if you have a button on there, if you wear your button like they wear their name tags saying, ask me about clinical trials, that is a way to engage those patients that we're having a hard time getting enrolled in community clinical trials. Or the other thing we also do in our cancer center, we have plenty of flyers posted throughout the cancer center talking about the importance of clinical trials, but more importantly, educating people, letting them know we don't participate in clinical trials, then how do we know what's going to work for our bodies? So, and also with SWOG and other community organizations, if we work with the patient advocates and the community advocates by going out educating the community and increasing the enrollment of Black patients into clinical trials, I think we will have a better job at it. But the main thing, what I think I would like for people to really take into consideration or think about is be intentional about building trust and relationship. If you do not build that trust and have that relationship with those underrepresented communities, we're going to keep going round and round and having these same problems years later. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to kind of wrap up with some ideas about plans of actions, and Gayatri is going to share a couple of additional thoughts, and then that's when we were planning to have a little bit more open discussion here. So hopefully we'll still have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. I just want to answer Dr. Pichai's question about recruitment to certain subpopulation, delaying clinical trials. recruitment. I think that, we acknowledge that challenge or barrier, but some things that we can do, and Dr. Patricia Robinson, who's here, who's one of our DEI fellows, we've been in discussion about some ideas like coming up with a DEI dashboard. So every institution can pitch in their racial, ethnic recruitment in addition to just, in addition to other demographics. Also their catchment areas. Perhaps SWOG can create a heat map. So when you are looking for gaps in your accrual, you know which site to go to increase your recruitment. So I think these are some of the ideas that we've been entertaining, and hopefully these would help the leadership plan ahead as well. So just to summarize what we discussed today, and some things to probably take home or consider as plan of action. For all the trialists, investigators in this room and virtual, at the level of protocol development and implementation, consider these design pragmatic trials that can be easily integrated into routine clinical practice, use methodology that was created by SWOG and which I shared with you all. And this resource is available to all the investigators on the SWOG website. And consider your forecast to mirror your subpopulation within the study population. Trial eligibility to be reflective of real-world patients. Offer support, especially to overcome financial barriers. Create strong stakeholder relationship to overcome barriers, like my other speakers alluded to. Leverage technology to improve access and efficiencies and to disseminate information. And some of the tools at the level of the research sites, which was dealt with by one of the speakers, but perhaps there's a lot more tools out there that can be incorporated at your institution levels. Most importantly, implicit bias training to promote cultural competency, recruit research staff from diverse backgrounds, adopt site self-assessment tools and strategies, create DEI toolkits, screening and accrual logs, minority recruitment plans at the institution levels, consider clinical trial matching and trial navigators throughout the continuum of the clinical study. Invest in operational infrastructure such as community-based outreach, language interpreters, financial and social needs assistance programs, etc. And create patient-centric recruitment and retention plans. I think at the end of it, with a concerted effort, with leadership, empathy, and intentionality, I think this is a very achievable goal. Thank you.
I did want to give, I know Ron Chen, who's our AD of Health Equities on. Ron, do you want to provide any additional comments? I know that we kind of had to pass over a few based on our technical issues. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Andy. Hi, everybody. Nice to see some of you, and thanks for being invited. I was just actually going to type in the chat box that if anybody wanted any more information about the campaign that we launched, which I thought was quite successful, and as some people said, really beautiful things that came out of it, I was going to type in my email so then people can contact us. We would love to sort of share our experience, and other institutions wanted to replicate that, we certainly would be happy to lend our expertise and help out.
Thank you. I think that was actually one of our questions was partnering with other institutes that we asked, and I did see that we had quite a response. And so we're happy to put you in touch with people to indicate how we've actually taken this approach from a really grassroots level up to try to improve our communications. With that, I know that we're running a little long, but we can take, I know there were some questions. If there's any additional questions, either online or in person, please come up to the microphone.
Hey, Phil Lammers, I'm with Baptist NCORE, Minority and Underserved NCORE. We serve a 3-state system, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas. So really excited about this work. I'm glad that we're addressing these. obviously a huge, multifaceted issue. A lot of the sites have a lot of work to do on institutional racism and implicit bias and such. And I think, working on protocols is really important. I'd like to make a plea for more educational materials too that are specific to the populations we want to hit. There was that ECOG study that was open that was targeting minority patients looking at neurotoxicity. They had some of the best handouts and information for patients that really made patients feel more comfortable after reading about it, seeing pictures of patients that look like them. I think the more of that we can create with each of our protocols so that when the patient's meeting the physician for the first time, they can feel more comfortable about the entire research community being active and really intentional and on recruiting patients that look like that.
Thank you. And I would like to at least make one comment. Online, they love the button idea.
Good morning, Barbara Segarra, patient advocate for the cancer care delivery, Latina, living in Puerto Rico, but very interested in increasing diversity. Two comments. One, when it was mentioned that when we have gaps in accruals to look, I think what we have to do in the design, and SWOG has so many sites, so I think one of the things that we have to do is identify who are, what patients are in each of the sites. And instead of wanting to meet our goal, be sure since the beginning that we know who are our sites and those to be aggressively recruiting and educating and including them in the trials, right? Because it's not when we are having a SWOG for 5 years in the implementation, then following the numbers. I think we, in the forecast, is not that we want them, is where are we gonna find them, right? And another thing that came up yesterday in one of the NCORP leaders meeting is the lack of resources. And maybe as SWOG, we can have a list of resources that people can, I talked about that FDA has videos about clinical trials in Spanish, and people didn't know. So Dr. Hirschman and I are gonna try to see if we can come up, because language is a huge barrier, right? And they were telling me that even if somebody comes with a son, or it has to be a professional interpreter. And there was a paper that I read that even the professional interpreters add things that are not part of the conversation. So there's a lot of issues, right? And I know we're not gonna solve them. I'm happy that we're talking about them, but things that we should consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for our presenters for the really thought-provoking and informative presentation and your participation in the discussion. And Andrew, thanks for organizing the symposium. So we're going to move on to our next regular items, which will be the publication update from Bill Barlow on the breast committee manuscripts and large or important presentations that came out in the past 6 months. And Gayatri and Roberta, I look forward to working with you on addressing and probably, hopefully, dismantling some of these barriers in our trials.
So let me tell you about some of the publications since our last meeting. This one is actually several of us from SWOG are on this, but it's actually the ASCO guidelines were updated in lieu of the responder results, for example, for using biomarkers to determine whether you use endocrine therapy or chemotherapy. So we had a large impact on the ASCO guidelines from that trial. Under review is a translational paper from 8814 from Dr. Spears looking at the SET index and whether it's prognostic in this trial, and it received a good review from JCO and has been resubmitted. SO500, we were looking, and what that trial was concerned was circulating tumor cells, as you might remember, and we were looking at blood specimens to the actual slides from them, looking at extracellular vesicles, and it turns out they were highly prognostic as well, even accounting for CTCs, and that has been resubmitted to precision medicine. SO800, this was looking at tumor infiltrating lymphocytes based on slides and automatic counting of lymphocytes on those slides in SO800. And that was submitted. I don't have the journal down here, but a revised version was invited for that as well. Now, the main results from S1416, which many of you enrolled patients for, was submitted to Lancet Oncology. Resubmission was invited. Dr. Sharma put in incredible work in the resubmission for that, and it just went back last week. And it's under a rapid review process, so if it's accepted, it would appear very shortly. SO221, we saw a presentation from Dr. Hertz in the translational medicine section. It's a paper very close to submission, looking at vitamin D insufficiency as a risk factor for peripheral neuropathy. And a paper, there were two papers from SO226. The first one has been published more than a year ago, looking at thymidine kinase activity as a predictor of both progression-free survival and overall survival, and a possible predictor of benefit from combination therapy. It was, the second publication actually reflects the approach that was used for FDA submission. It's a little different approach, different cut point for TK, but it was actually approved by the FDA as a byproduct of SO226, and so this paper is just describing how it got its approval. And this is a paper from our cancer control side, S1415CD. So it was a cluster randomized trial looking at standing order entry systems. This is for the intermediate risk patients who are at risk for febrile neutropenia based on their chemotherapy regimen. And it says accepted. It's actually published now. It came out last week in JCO from Dr. Hirschman. And a second paper from the same trial, which includes both breast, lung, and colorectal cancer patients. This is for the low-risk patients and the high-risk patients. For this publication, also accepted for JAMA Network Open, and all the high-risk patients were breast cancer patients in this trial. So now some advertisements for things that are upcoming. So ASTRO is meeting next week, and there's going to be a presentation by Dr. Jagsy from S107 looking at radiotherapy use in that trial and local regional recurrence. It's an oral presentation. And now I have a whole slew of possible presentations at San Antonio that are upcoming. So to note, S1207, these are the first results from S1207, will be presented on Tuesday at San Antonio. I want to make sure you notice Tuesday is usually the educational sessions, but it's actually going to be scientific sessions in the afternoon, and we have 3 oral presentations on Tuesday afternoon, so I hope that you can attend those. So Dr. McGregor will present those results. Also, oral presentations in the same session on Tuesday afternoon from S107. Dr. Abdu will present race and clinical outcomes in that trial. And Dr. King will present our PROS looking at cognitive impairment, self-reported cognitive impairment by chemotherapy or endocrine therapy over time, it goes up to 3 years in that. And so that will also be an oral presentation in that same session. Related to that pro paper is another look at pros in terms of anxiety and fatigue in the same trial. That's going to be a poster presentation. Not quite sure what day that poster presentation will be. And also from Responder, a look at HER2 low and how that affects both chemotherapy benefit and prognosis. Done by Dr. Spring. It's a poster presentation here, which originally was accepted as, but actually has been moved to an oral session that is exclusively concerned with HER2 low patients. We have two posters from S8014 from the same group. They were looking at the H&E slide, and they apply artificial intelligence to the H&E slide to come up with a prognostic signature based only on the slide. They don't have any other clinical information other than that slide. And they try to determine what is a risk model for outcome in that trial. And so I know one of them has been accepted for a poster. I don't know the fate of the Dr. Chen application, but they're both concerned with AI techniques. We're getting a lot of proposals recently for looking at AI on H&E slides. We're building a library of scans from H&E slides, and so that will be foster a large amount of work in the future for us. Also to note, so based on several trials, Dr. Hirschman also looked at emergency room use and hospitalization among elderly breast cancer patients enrolled on our trials. That's going to be a spotlight poster presentation. And S1714, which is the cancer control trial, looking at chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, is going to also be a spotlight poster presentation at San Antonio. And Dr. Hertz will be taking this trial a step further by looking at blood. It has serial blood collection in this trial, and he has received an R01. Well, not quite, but will receive an R01 because of the score on his excellent score to look at this. And then finally, S1904, this is a trial in progress. It's a mechanism we haven't done very often, is do a poster of a trial in progress. We did it a little bit early on, but we've since got out of that habit. It's probably something worth returning to, making sure people know about our trials. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm going to hand this over to Priyanka Sharma, who will moderate the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Bill. Certainly a lot of work by many of you and all of you for supporting our studies. So we'll move on to the next item in our agenda, which is update from our patient advocates, Jeannie and Roberta. Okay. No offense taken.
I figure it's kind of silly for me to go all the way up there for a few lines. You've already heard from Roberta this morning, so she said, this was my part. She said, I did my work this morning. So Roberta and I are the two breast cancer advocates for this committee. We're both survivors. I'm a survivor of inflammatory breast cancer. Our information will be up on the slides. I'm a long-term person in advocacy for 25 years. So I'm working hard at getting Roberta trained so that when I finish my second term, which will be up in just 2 years, she'll be able to train a new person who comes on. But as you saw this morning, she's well prepared. So as you now know, we're both the advocates, and we're also part of the Patient Advocacy Committee, which makes up all the patient advocates from the other committees, disease committees. And we also now have what are called community advocates. These are folks who don't necessarily have the background in clinical trials and research that we need to have as part of the disease committees. But they have the opportunity to really know what's happening in their communities on a day-to-day basis and can really help us when we're looking at trials. Who's the population we're really looking at? So we now have people who represent the LGBTQ, can't get it out this morning, LGBTQ community, the young adult community, veterans, Latinx, and we're trying hard to fill all of our positions. We still are looking for a rural representative, Asian Pacific Islander, represent metastatic cancers, and some others. It's really important that, as you've heard in our mini symposium, that we really look at the population that's affected by what we're trying to study. And if we can bring in those folks, maybe they can really help us not make mistakes early on, and so that later we're not having to wonder why we can't recruit patients to a trial. If we do better at making sure we have our trial designed in a way that will encourage that population to enroll. So be sure when you're thinking about a trial, whether it's worthwhile to bring in one of these folks. Both Roberta and I remain very active in the broader oncology community and in other breast cancer things. Roberta attended the AACR Disparities Conference this year. We're both going to be in San Antonio. I think this will be my 21st year. It's kind of hard to believe. And I just came from a meeting called the Society for Improvement in Diagnostic Medicine. I didn't even know such a group existed until I was asked to speak there about the diagnostic work I've been doing with some others in our organization on inflammatory breast cancer. But it's fun to see what other organizations are doing in the similar space. A lot of emphasis in the same things we're doing in DEI. But also hearing from patients who had disease diagnostic errors. How can we improve teaching new physicians moving through the process of their education so that we don't make some of the mistakes we've had to back up and relearn now. Especially interesting on how people chart. I'm a nurse by profession, and was embarrassed about some of the things I know I have charted in the past that I was reminded were not a very good thing to do. And how do you call out others who are perhaps using language they shouldn't? So just a reminder that Roberta and I are here. Make sure you, as you are thinking about a trial, bring us in really early. Instead of waiting when it doesn't enroll as well as you'd like, and ask us to try and make that happen. Maybe we can help mitigate some of those issues early on so that it's not such a problem later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie and Roberta. So we'll move on to our next update, which is Translational Medicine Committee update. Dr. Thompson will provide that.
Thanks very much. If you don't mind, I'll just speak to the microphone so those online can also hear, and apologize to those who have to bring their necks round. So we had a great meeting yesterday. We were privileged to be given 3 hours. We heard from 2 commercial organizations, Caris and also Symbiosis. Our aim, thanks to Andy Godwin getting them to come along, is to try and get commercial enterprises, research enterprises engaged with our trials early on. We also heard from some of the successful things that have been done, and Bill Barlow has been already telling you a little bit about some of the publications that are forthcoming from the translational medicine side of the breast group. What was most important, though, was that we were hearing 6 about to happen translational medicine proposals that are coming through with some of the trials that are either just closing or getting to the point where there's enough patients gone into the trial that we should be thinking about how we can do some of the research behind the scenes. So what we're trying to do is compress that timeline between a trial reaching its endpoint, publication, and some of the translational work being done and published as close as possible to that. So we avoid some of the issues we've got with some of the older trials, where we're 10, 20 years behind the times. Two final things to say. First of all, to anyone who's out there listening at home or at work, anyone who's in the room, Andy Godwin and myself, Alistair Thompson, are very, very keen that if there's somebody who's got new ideas, wants to join some of the work that's going on, or would like to do something different with the trials that are out there, we're very keen to hear from you. And if you'd like to join the Translational Medicine Working Group, we'd appreciate you reaching out to us. And then secondly and finally, we have the most amazing, massive tissue and blood bank, which SWOG has accumulated in its breast trials over the last several decades. It's really important that this doesn't become a museum, that it becomes a bank that is used. So my plea to the smarter than me people out there, and there are many of you, is please have a look at what we've got in the bank, think about the trials we've got, and myself and Andy Godwin are very keen to hear from you to try and get some further fantastic science done on the basis of the amazing SWOG trials. Thank you.
Thank you. It was indeed a very, very robust 3-hour meeting yesterday. We heard from industry folks and updates on many, many ongoing projects and many exciting new projects that will start on our completed trials.
I will promise that we'll have water next time in the room and maybe some snacks, but I apologize for those that endured 3 hours without any drinks. I apologize.
So our next section is providing updates on recently approved and developing concepts, and there's 3 of them, SWOG 2206, 2212, and a new one, Tropion. So Erin, do you want to start with 2206?
Good morning, everyone. So just want to give an update on S2206, a study that has been approved by Breast Cancer Steering Committee, but as of late, we've made a few modifications to the trial design based on some logistical issues that have come up surrounding the integral biomarker, which is the MammaPrint assay. And this concept actually just went under a re-review by Breast Cancer Steering Committee last week, but we wanted to go ahead and show you what we've proposed and hopefully generate some conversation and some thoughts.
Erin, if you want to step back, then you can see the screen.
That's perfect, thank
Yes.
you. Okay, so just to remind everybody about the background and rationale for this study. So the I-SPY2 clinical trial has generated really the preliminary data, helping us understand that patients with really an ultra-high risk, designated as MP2 MammaPrint results, appear to have very chemotherapy-sensitive disease and may also actually benefit from immunotherapy. So what you can see here is comparing patients that are all high risk by MammaPrint, but MP1 would be just sort of on the lower end of high risk, MP2 is ultra high risk. And you can see when immunotherapy is added to their neoadjuvant chemotherapy regimens, those with MP2 cancers appear to have significantly improved rates of pathologic complete response. So we just want to make sure everybody's aware that actually this MP2 category is readily identifiable on a MammaPrint report. It is defined as a MammaPrint index that is between -0.57 to -1. And I just showed you there what a kind of routine MammaPrint report would look like and how we might identify patients that would qualify for this trial. So this is the updated trial design, and I'll just mention that really some of the modifications that we've now proposed relate to the fact that in further conversations with Agendia around the MammaPrint assay, they really felt that for the vast majority of patients who enter onto this trial, that MammaPrint can probably be billed as a standard of care test. Previously, we had shown you a trial design where MammaPrint was provided free of charge to all patients entering this study. But since the vast majority of patients likely meet criteria for this to be billed as a standard of care test, There's sort of that component of the pathway. And then there's also going to be a way to enter the trial where, patients could have free testing, although we anticipate that maybe a smaller proportion of the patients that enter the study would go through the free testing mechanism for the MammaPrint assay. So essentially, regardless of how we obtain that MammaPrint result, if patients are this MP2 or ultra high risk MammaPrint category, they would then be eligible to be randomized to either standard of care neoadjuvant chemotherapy with the ACT regimen versus ACT plus durvalumab. And then subsequently, moving on from that neoadjuvant systemic therapy, patients would get standard of care surgery, radiation therapy if indicated, as well as endocrine therapy with or without abemaciclib. There is no adjuvant immunotherapy component that is a part of this trial, so really the investigational component is all in the neoadjuvant setting. And I also want to mention that this trial design is actually very analogous and similar to something like what we did in Responder, where some patients came to the trial through a standard of care testing mechanism and others had testing provided free of charge. So just to kind of get at the crux of this question, what patient population might need this free testing mechanism? And I think the population that we wish to highlight and are curious to hear thoughts about is actually the premenopausal node-positive population. When we think about who we would normally be ordering gene expression profiling for to determine whether or not they would need chemotherapy, I think based on our discussions in working group yesterday, we can generally agree that for patients that are clinically node negative or postmenopausal node positive, that it's very reasonable to order gene expression profiling to guide our chemotherapy decision making. But for premenopausal node positive patients, since we're going to be recommending chemo for them anyway, would we consider it really standard of care to order a gene expression profiling assay? So just some summary points on the current status of this proposal. As I mentioned, Agendia has proposed that MammaPrint be ordered as a standard of care test for the majority of patients considering enrollment in S2206. They have had a successful track record of this with I-SPY 2 and basically have shared with us data suggesting that they do not have issues with insurance reimbursement on core biopsy specimens, even outside of I-SPY 2 in both academic and community practice settings. There is also some precedent for this within NCTM trials, and as I mentioned, the Responder trial had a similar design, and currently in NRG-BR007, there's a subset of tumors where the Oncotype DX assay is provided free of charge versus the majority of patients who have it ordered as a standard of care test. At present, Agendia has agreed to support 200 free tests for the first 12 months of accrual, with opportunity to kind of reassess this number if the free testing pathway is utilized more than we anticipate. And I also want to mention that the MammaPrint report is actually going to be modified by Agendia to highlight the S2206 clinical trial to ensure that if it is ordered as a standard of care test, that it's highlighted that patients may be eligible for this study. So as I mentioned, due to these proposed changes, we just presented this concept again to Breast Cancer Steering Committee last week, and we're awaiting kind of further discussions.
Aaron, one of the things I shared with you just yesterday is AMP, which is an organization I'm part of, the American Molecular Pathology Group, that's decentralizing MammaPrint testing. So there's a push to actually do this at different sites now and not at one. So what would happen if there's a test that's done at one of the patient sites, comparable MammaPrint test now, NGS based? How would that affect basically enrollment under this study? Because you wouldn't want to be double billing, you wouldn't want to be sending it to Agendia. What would you consider? Because that's a real possibility that they're going to decentralize this test, because we're looking at it ourselves.
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand your question, I think your concern is if patients have a similar test, right, where we don't want to double bill insurance. So I think that is another way that we may utilize this free testing platform, right? So that's another reason, aside from the fact that clinically there may be a population of patients where we wouldn't normally order this test in routine practice. So I think the probably two biggest contributors to the free testing pathway would be premenopausal node-positive patients and those that have had some other gene expression profiling assay already and we're concerned about double billing insurance. I will mention, just in talking to some colleagues here who have iSpy open, they have shared with us actually that they have on occasion ordered both MammaPrint and Oncotype DX and have had them both reimbursed without difficulty. Not that we're suggesting that that's the appropriate way to go forward, but I think our colleagues who have iSpy open were interested in your thoughts because this is obviously a circumstance that you're dealing with on a regular basis.
Dr. Weiner.
So I'll say what I said yesterday. I'm Eric Weiner, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a fish out of water at SWOG. So Agendia will kill this study if they do this, because it doesn't matter what is allowed and what isn't allowed. People don't order this test. So there are really two choices. One is they pay, and the second is you open it up so you include patients who have oncotype of some number, whether that's over 30 or whether it's higher, and you can go back to Luca Gianni's old study to come up with some estimate of where the oncotype is, where you start getting a lot of chemotherapy sensitivity. And if you threaten that, then in fact, Agendia may come through with payment. But what I just don't want to see is for you to have gone through all of this work and then be essentially hamstrung by the company. So I think that the steering committee will be cooperative, no longer being involved in the steering committee. I can't guarantee that, but I'd push this one, because you just don't want to be, a year from now, having had this study open for 6 months with 14 patients on it.
And I think excellent points. And, just again, to remind us all, we're talking about this logistical issue, but what we really want to see move forward is this therapy for our patients, that we have good clinical evidence is helpful to them. And we're very open to, others' ideas about how we can navigate this challenge.
So just to reflect on this, so what Eric brought up is actually a really, really good point. So if any of you actually have patients where you happen to have MammaPrint and recurrence score results, we would love to really pool the data, because I think it would help everybody if we would have some degree of understanding how to convert the results. So as you saw on the slide that Erin showed, the recurrence score is a continuous score, but so is the MammaPrint. So actually there is a real possibility to convert, and that would be a terrific boost.
And we couldn't do it in silico in available data sets.
So really, if you have that data, we would love to actually work with you.
Why can't you go back to the tissue in iSpy where MammaPrint was done and do oncotype to try to?
I'm sure you know the answer to that, right? So that's the problem. So these data sets exist, but the companies are not really willing, not that keen to do that.
Too eager.
I would say that, so we have iSpy open and have had patients come to us with oncotype and then tried to get MammaPrint. And sometimes you can wiggle it around to get that done, but it doesn't mean that the patient isn't out of pocket, even if the test is covered by insurance. And so that's something that if you come up with this alternate strategy, you really need to think about, because it can be like $100 copay for these tests. And so just because you can do it, insurance can pay for it, it doesn't mean that the patients aren't suffering by ordering it twice. So you're going to need to create some mechanism for that funding,
And I think that's one of the clear indication to use the free testing in the current proposal, that somebody's already had oncotype, then they would go the free testing route.
Yeah, I think we
Yes, that was Eric's point. It would complicate the whole process, even though it exists. It would add barriers.
So at our site, our surgeons had a study going on with Agendia where they would do MammaPrint on almost all of those patients. And what we found is that our medical oncologists didn't really know what to do with it. So they were almost all doing oncotype on those patients after. They've gotten most of those paid for actually. But to answer your question, we do have some patients for which we could answer some of those questions.
I'd love to catch up with you on this, and maybe we could do the recurrence score and the rest in the context of a collaboration with Genomic Health.
And we could go back and look at, 8814 RX Ponder and, generate MammaPrint in silico if it's possible. Some thoughts, yes. Not to complicate your already complicated life with 2206, but as you said, the ultimate goal is to be able to get this therapy to our patients.
Yes. For this barrier to not be able to get this therapy that we have really excellent data, right, to suggest that it would be helpful to them. So
yes,
we appreciate all of the thoughts and suggestions.
Yes, so I will use the term Kathy used this morning at the chairs meeting. We need chairs to strong arm the companies. So I'm not volunteering myself. Okay, so we actually do have a poll question for this. So before I pull up the poll question, because it is on a timer, we put it on a timer to get rid of technological challenges. So it's 30 seconds, so get your phones out. We'll have to join the poll through a text. You will text to a number, a certain a term, and then you join the poll. But those instructions should be on the top of the slide. Okay, so with the updated trial design allowing for standard of care MammaPrint testing and an option for free testing, which is not covered, would you be enthusiastic about this study? So you join by texting 22333, that's the number, and you text Courtney Will 940, and the choices are A, yes, B, no, maybe. Looks like one successful person has joined the poll. Actually, I'm going to go back and see if I can restart it. Let's see. It worked to restart, so the rest of you can actually now join. If this is a group full of teenagers, 15 seconds, we would have everybody join the poll and vote. You can join on the computer too, yes, through the website up there. So I see 7 of you voted yes, nobody no, and nobody maybe. So we have 7 very enthusiastic investigators. The others are keeping their opinions to themselves. But we will come back with what we hear from the steering committee and some of your excellent suggestions about looking at equivalent in oncotype to provide some flexibility. The next update is from the Scarlet trial, which I will provide on behalf of Dr. Mitri and Rim and myself. This is shorter chemotherapy adapted to pathological response and TIL enrichment in triple-negative breast cancer. This is the trial design. This was approved by the Breast Cancer Steering Committee in July of this year, and it's under protocol development. So the primary hypothesis of this non-inferiority trial is in patients with early-stage triple-negative breast cancer, carbotaxane chemoimmunotherapy is non-inferior to taxane platinum anthracycline-based chemoimmunotherapy. As you all are aware, with the approval of pembrolizumab in the context of Keynote 522, the regimen of 4 chemotherapy drugs and pembrolizumab has kind of become the de facto standard of care for our patients with stage 2 and 3 triple-negative breast cancer. So this trial is assessing an anthracycline-free, shorter platinum taxane regimen given in combination with pembrolizumab. The primary endpoint is event-free survival, which is adjusted for both nodal status and TIL enrichment. TIL reporting will not be required for patient registration and randomization. It will happen through the course of the study. We will collect the H&E slides to read TILs as the study is ongoing. The adjuvant treatment is pretty standard and is in line with standard practice. Patients will be receiving or it's recommended that they receive pembrolizumab adjuvantly, except for those who have a PCR can participate in the pembrolizumab de-escalation trials, which we will have one with an NCTN, which will be led by Sarah Tolini. We are excluding the higher clinical stage, the inflammatory breast cancer, N3 and T4 node positives from this study in terms of the Keynote 522 regimen, both weekly and every weekly carboplatin is allowed. We're also allowing AC to be given either dose dense or every 3 weeks. The pembrolizumab will need to be still every three weeks, and to complete all 8 cycles on arm A, barring any toxicities. And adjuvant olaparib will be allowed for those with residual disease and germline BRCA1 or 2 mutation. There are many secondary endpoints, many around TIL enrichment, and then we have an excellent PRO QL team that has developed really nice elements for those endpoints, and then concordance between central and automated TILs is one of the translational endpoints that is pre-built into the study. So this, as I said, this was approved in July of this year by steering committee. The protocol is under development, and we anticipated that it will go back to CTAP sometime next month with an anticipated activation date in March of 2023. We will also be collecting blood samples, hopefully at 5 time points, working on funding for that to have samples available for future translational work, along with archival formalin-fixed paraffin-embedded primary and residual tissue. These are just basic inclusion and exclusion criteria, pretty standard, except that we are kind of pushing the envelope, going up to 5% for ER/PR in our eligibility criteria, as long as endocrine therapy is not planned or recommended. Submission of an H&E slide at time of enrollment is required for the study, so we can make the TIL assessment. TIL assessment are actually integral biomarkers because they're part of also our interim and futility analysis. So this study also, I have a poll question, a simple poll question. Will you open this study at your institution? Yes, no, due to competing studies. No, I don't like the trial design. And no, I don't have many eligible patients at my side, or I'm still considering it. Let's see, get your phones out. And we understand many of you might have I-SPY or other institutional investigation-initiated studies that might be there. I do want to hear from Phil about engagement of NCORE sites for something like this. And Greg, you can make a comment, yes.
Memphis guys, come on. I think this would be well received at NCORE sites. There was a discussion yesterday about using docetaxel for 6 months.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think we can overcome that. But I think that there will be, especially in some of our, we probably get more older patients in this study, and those patients that we think we're probably doing too much with Keynote 522 as it is.
So that's a good point. So perhaps that's something we should consider monitoring, because we do want this to be representative and not only have everybody with 2.5 centimeter node negative cancer or a median age of 65 for this. So I think we will talk to the stat office about monitoring that.
So I personally think this is a very important study. The question is this a neoadjuvant study or neoadjuvant and adjuvant? I know yesterday you said there was an opportunity to enroll on a different SWOG study. What about institutions that may have an adjuvant trial? Could they then enroll on that because the study ended at surgery?
So the study doesn't end at surgery. The primary endpoint is event-free survival, but the intervention of the study is only neoadjuvant. So the de-escalation of treatment is only neoadjuvant. All the adjuvant treatment is per standard of care. And the trial, at least even in the protocol, we are writing that the patients can participate in the pembrolizumab de-escalation trials if they have a PCR optimized study. And there is no statement in the protocol that says one cannot participate in residual disease escalation trials. We will have to think about how many patients participate and whether equally balanced between the 2 arms. That would be the main thing. Like if more patients in one arm versus another arm participate in escalation trials that have residual disease, it might impact our outcomes, but there's ways to monitor and adjust that. So I don't think we can discourage patients from participating in studies after surgery, even though long-term outcome is our primary endpoint. If that, Bill, do you want to say anything about that? Yeah.
Yes, we know it contaminates the trial a little bit for the outcome, but we decided we have to live with that to be compatible with people that want to go on residual disease trials afterwards. And Optimize also has a little bit of interference with their outcome as well, but it's expected to be minor.
It's better than patient leaving the study, right? Like they say, I'm going to withdraw from the study because I want to participate in something else. So we will have to make sure we're collecting that information and that our case report forms are reflective of any investigational drugs post-surgery as well. Okay, so we will move on to the next study, which is TROPION-Breast03, a very exciting new opportunity, and Dr. Pushtai will talk about that.
So I'm really delighted to publicly announce to you a new partnership that we entered into with AstraZeneca. So we are going to serve as the lead academic partner in a large international randomized registration trial that will replace our S1418 study. This is for triple-negative breast cancer patients who had residual disease after neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And on this slide, you see that we really comprise the US leadership of this trial. Aditya Bardia is the international coordinating chair, and we have a steering committee from our investigators, and Priyanka will be the translational chair, co-chair representing the US, and Don Hirschman is our US quality of life representative. AstraZeneca and we are working together to actually create the international non-US component of the leadership. So DATO-DXd is a TROP2 targeting antibody. You recognize TROP2 as the antigen that sacituzumab govitecan is targeting. So that's the same antigen, but a different antibody and a slightly different topoisomerase load. So if you move to the next slide, then you see phase 1 and subsequently the phase 2 results with this drug, which really made AstraZeneca and Daiichi, who developed it, to be excited about this agent. So this shows you that in this heavily pretreated population, there was a remarkable efficacy of the drug as a single agent, both in the entire population, including those who actually had prior sacituzumab govitecan and those who did not. The next slide is the arm from the phase 2 component of this with durvalumab, and again, these waterfall plots speak for themselves. So this brings us to the next slide, which is the study design. So this is a 3-arm study, and we wanted to check not only whether DATO-DXd is better than physician's choice, and the physician's choice standard of care is either capecitabine, that probably will be the drug used outside of the US, and also within the US for patients who did not receive neoadjuvant pembrolizumab, or it could be capecitabine plus pembrolizumab if someone is receiving the Keynote 5-2 regimen. But the 2 investigational arms are DATO-DXd alone or DATO-DXd together with durvalumab. So this is really, in fact, the first study that really looks at this question, whether you need to add the immunotherapy component in this setting. The primary comparison, however, is between the DATO-DXd plus durva and the investigator's choice. So this is going to be a 1,700 study, 1,075 patient randomized trial. And unlike the S1418, there is no limit, lower limit in the extent of residual disease that these patients could have. This is the key eligibility criteria. I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. I just want to point out to you that we excluded germline BRCA positive patients because of the adjuvant olaparib component that would be difficult to integrate with this design. And patients have to complete at least 6 cycles of neoadjuvant treatment of physician's choice. So in the interest of time, the next slide, please. So this is an important slide because unlike most of our studies where we reach out to you and through the, I forgot the name of the central website, through the way you register patients. So this study actually is run logistically by AstraZeneca. And Laura DeLong, the associate director for the study, has been reaching out to you, or has reached out to you, but we would like you to also be cognizant that if you are interested in participating in the study and you have not been approached by AstraZeneca, we provided the site contacts for AstraZeneca. Then if you haven't been contacted by AZ, that's probably because our contact information is not correct. So if you are interested, please reach out to Laura DeLong, and we will also send out an email to remind our membership that this is our S1418 replacement and a really important clinical trial that I hope we will be able to support as a group. I also would like to thank Kathy Albane, who really brokered this contract on a very short notice through the CPP. So this is a clinical trial partnership trial, not an NCI trial, as you probably surmised. So Kathy, thank you for doing the tremendous amount of background work to complete this whole process within less than 6 months, really. So please.
Kathy, do you want to elaborate on some peculiarities of this? Yes.
Yeah, so all of our other CTP trials that are coming down the pike, and some of you went to the open forum, and it'll be posted on the website soon, will be done as usual. You will receive site payments that are at industry level funding through SWOG. There will be a fixed contract with you, feasibility through SWOG, CTP. Not this study. This is different, as Lajos just mentioned. So it's not that the site contact information is wrong. What SWOG has sent to AstraZeneca is to the site PI. So at my own institution, I didn't get the invite because it went to our site PI who does a different disease, and it hasn't filtered down to me yet. So please do email Laura if your site, your breast investigators have not heard. And you need to do it very soon because they're going to close feasibility and site selection pretty quickly. And I will advocate, though, for us, we need a little extra time given we have to wait so long to do this because of the contracting and budgeting between SWOG and AstraZeneca is now done, but it took a while. Our scientific core group, which he showed the names, sit on the steering committee, but we have been involved from the get-go with protocol, synopsis review, feasibility questionnaire review, full protocol review, and before it went to the FDA. So we've been scientifically involved, and that's our role as the lead academic partners. So it's not like other foundation trials that you may have heard about in other groups. This is really truly where we are the scientific leaders globally for the trial. So we were excited to take this on as a new venture outside our usual SOP for CTP.
Thank you, Kathy, for the clarification.
Alistair.
As somebody who's had nothing to do with any of this, I think we should be congratulating those of you that have spent a lot of time and trouble to put in place what's going to be a massive trial, internationally led by SWOG. This is fabulous to see. Congratulations.
A lot of kudos goes to Kathy and her team for many hours of work and attention to detail and lots of things. But this paves a new path for future, for other things.
And I think the exciting part, I think mostly, is the scientific opportunities for a lot of our young investigators, because we co-chair the key committees of translational medicine and symptom control and quality of life. And we'll have opportunities for many sub-studies and investigations over time in this trial.
So we have a similar polling question. Will you open this, the TROPION-Breast03 at your site? Yes, no, due to competing studies, no, because you don't like the trial design, you may not have eligible patients, or you're still on the fence.
So Andy, how comes that you had 52 responders to your questions and we only have 8?
Yes.
Yeah, that was afraid of.
Yes, and I suspect there may be CRAs or non-clinicians that don't feel like they can make the decision for their enrolling providers here. But we have, And I think the online folks are not polling, so we may put a word out to them about if they have any, I don't know if there's anything in chat or other questions. Okay, so we will move on to our next section, which is review of open and upcoming SWOG and other CTSU trials, and we will start with SWOG 2007, which is Dr. Brenner, and I think he is going to join us virtually for it.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So the S2007 is our phase 2 trial of SASE for patients with HER2-negative breast cancer and brain mets. Next slide. So just to review the key inclusion criteria, obviously this is for HER2-negative invasive breast cancer that's metastasized to the brain. Two important criteria just to mention here is one of them is that they have to have had CNS progression after previous CNS-directed therapy, which could be surgery, radiation therapy, or any combination thereof. This was something that was requested by the FDA early in the development with the pilot study that came before this, which we enrolled about 12 patients with brain mets and sampled their tumors for levels of SN38. And so this one might be something that we could address with the FDA again. Another one is that they had to have measurable disease by RAIN-OBM, and the RAIN-OBM recommends that you use a minimum size of 1 centimeter. Although I'll show you in a second, there is some flexibility with going down to 5 millimeters. They have to have no significant seizure activity. They have to be on a stable dose of steroids and otherwise relatively standard criteria. Next slide. So we first activated in January of 21. We're approved at 95 sites. A lot of the sites seem to be still pending. I guess they're keeping it kind of there unless until they find a patient. Our accrual has not been great. We would like to have been done by now, but maybe I was just being optimistic. We are actually at 15. Since we put together the slides a week or two ago, we had 2 more. And I think part of that is because we've had some recent sites join, such as Dana-Farber. Nancy Lynn has already put one on just recently. And so I think we might now have some of the sites that will really help. So we're at 15 of 44, so we're at about a third of our accrual goal. We're seeing typical treatment associated adverse events. Only one patient discontinued due to an AE, which was later in their course. We continue working with our champions as well as the PIs. I'm trying to reach out regularly to address any accrual barriers. As part of this, we discussed this. There's a new intracranial brain mets consortium called SAMARA, which was recently started. And so we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I did present 2007 to get input. And it was mentioned by some of the key participants that one of the biggest barriers was a 10 millimeter cutoff. A lot of investigators or physicians feel that they get a little bit uncomfortable when the tumors start to get larger in terms of not treating them or putting them on study, and they're worried they're going to get symptomatic, and they would probably be better able to accrue if we reduce the size and allowed patients with smaller tumors to go on. And a lot of the patients with anything greater than 10 millimeters would go straight to SRS, and so recommended that we consider modification for size. Next slide. So just to mention, the Raynaud brain mets criteria does have some language in there to address this. You know, while they do strongly recommend that you stick with a 10 millimeter or more, a lot of this is kind of directed by the slice thickness that sites use. And so if you're using, you know, larger slice thickness, it's really going to be not possible to detect the change. But a lot of the sites, especially, you know, sites that do a lot of brain met enrollment, they use thinner slices of 1 millimeter. And so it would be possible to include in the inclusion criteria that lower limit of 5 millimeter would be allowed if those are 1 millimeter slices. And then we would require a 3 millimeter minimum decrease for those tumors that are less than 10 millimeters, between 5 and 10. And so that's just something we wanted to consider. And that's all I have.
So is this something that can just go as a protocol revision, or you'd mentioned something about FDA early on? Is this something other authorities would have to bless?
I think this can go, because it's still within RANO-BM, I think this can go just as a change. Now, if we wanted to allow patients who didn't receive prior surgery or radiation, I think I'd have to go back to FDA on that. And I think we probably should, because I think, with our pilot data, we do see some clear responses. And so since there are documented responses, I think that they would be more open to allowing patients with active, previously untreated brain mets to be allowed as well.
Can you remind us, is the primary endpoint response by RANO-BM or something?
It is. The primary endpoint is response. And so we're looking for a greater than 20% response rate.
But Andrew, I actually thought that the current brain metastasis guidelines actually call for and allow systemic therapy for asymptomatic small brain mets as a first therapy, initial therapy. So making that amendment wouldn't actually be such a big deal. It would in fact bring you up to the
I think that especially true for HER2 positive disease where we have active systemic agents, but in triple negative breast cancer, it's a little bit more challenging because there's not a lot that has been shown to have intracranial activity.
I mean, except this drug, right? So there is actually a report that says that this drug works in the brain.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's our study is not the first one, in fact.
So
I think the bottom line is that we would really like to please try to implement the amendments because we like to complete the study and sort of confirm this initial phase 2 study that suggested that this drug has a good activity. And I don't think, I mean, anybody in the audience feel that this is a big deal to amend to include this as first-line therapy for asymptomatic small brain mets?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a problem, but I think the control rate with SRS is very high, even for 1, 2, 3 millimeter tumors. And they, shoot 5+ metastasis sometimes.
Yeah.
And the duration, usually lasts for, needless to say, patients are getting systemic therapy as well, usually. And the control usually lasts for a year or so. And if something recurs on site, it's usually pseudoprogression at about 9 months, 12 months. So people end up watching some of those as well. So it would have to be new lesions. It's people do less and less are getting whole brains. So it's hard to know what patients would go on in most cases.
So I think that's a well-made point. We also have to kind of start thinking about, and now thinking about these two subtypes, not totally there with HER2 positive disease, but now we have better therapies, so patients are living longer. So the second, third, fourth event in the brain is happening more frequently. So would it hurt the patient or the situation if the SRS was the first or the second episode of SRS was delayed? Because the era where TNBC patients had very short survival, you weren't worrying about those things, and now especially the hormone positive patients, they're clearly living for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah, I think that's a theoretical concern, and I think that sites that have not don't have experience in terms of delaying SRS might feel uncomfortable with it, but there are a lot of sites where we do delay SRS, and when they're asymptomatic, and we're not seeing any significant, adverse outcome from doing that. So I think it's just going to be that a lot of sites are just really used to just going straight to SRS, and until they, consider delaying it for a systemic agent, it's just going to be a little bit of an uncomfortableness for them. And they're going to be more comfortable doing it with smaller lesions, I think, than with larger lesions. So I think that giving smaller lesions might help with accrual just simply because they're going to be more comfortable with delaying SRS. Hopefully that makes sense.
We have another question.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think,
right now delaying SRS is not standard of care, so I think we have to be very careful about that. We know that local control with SRS for lesions smaller than 2 centimeters exceeds 90%. It's probably about 95% for lesions 1 centimeter. So I think there's a danger in saying, okay, we can just watch and wait because
we're not watching and waiting. The drug has CNS penetration, so
right,
yes.
but CNS penetration, which is still far inferior from a local control standpoint than SRS. It's not.
Yeah, I would argue that that's not totally true because of the fact, I mean, we know that from studies for HER2 positive disease where patients with active brain mets were enrolled and they saw activity. Those patients had not previously received SRS, many of them with active brain mets. So I think that that's an evolving paradigm. And so, yes, in the past when we did not have CNS active agents, that was true. But nowadays, it is standard of care in many situations to delay SRS in favor of CNS active agents.
So yes, Andrew, this was one of the...
Evolving, but again, evolving is not the same as established. And because I treat CNS, and personally, I think lesions that are 5 millimeters and smaller, I would feel comfortable deferring SRS, but I would not feel comfortable deferring it for lesions larger than 5 millimeters. Again, I think the evolution of CNS penetrance in newer agents allows us the flexibility, those of us who treat the brain and with gamma knife or LINAC radiosurgery, to think, okay, this lesion is 5 millimeters, this lesion is 3, they're getting the systemic therapy, let's see how it looks on the next MRI in 3 months. But again, I think we have to be careful because that is still evolving. That is not the standard of care.
Yeah, so I mean, we certainly respect that. And I think probably the message, Andrew, is that if I understand this correctly, your colleagues brought this up, that one of the two issues with the accrual rate was, right, the size limit, that they wanted to lower the size to 5 millimeter. And the other one was this issue that you could use this in the first line setting. And I think it doesn't mean that everybody, so I think it broadens the repertoire of sites that would participate, and people feel comfortable with it in the particular clinical situation. Depending on the situation, you probably would gain a couple of more patients by making these amendments. And of course, we totally respect this, that may not be appropriate for many others.
Right, and I think that there's going to be certain sites that are more comfortable with it, but for those sites that are already doing things like this, already investigating CNS active agents and deferring SRS, they are more comfortable doing it with smaller lesions. And so this will help accelerate accrual.
Yeah, so I think you have full support to move forward with the amendments. Shane, last thoughts?
One additional comment. So since this includes patients with HER2 negative disease, right, you may have patients who have hormone receptor positive breast cancer and their extracranial disease is very well controlled on their current regimen. We know that SRS is safe, it's very efficacious. Is this worth something where you're switching their systemic therapy when we already have a good CNS direction?
So I think those patients are probably going to not. So I think it's a balance between the systemic agent's toxicity, the need for that, not just for intracranial, but also for extracranial. And I'm sure that is one part of the enrollment. So that you have to look at the total picture for these patients. But again, these patients will go through therapies, eventually get on chemotherapy. And if you've had one CNS event, you're going to have another one at some point.
And to add to that, most of the time, the patients with hormone receptor positive disease that develop brain mets are not on their first line of systemic hormonal therapy. Those patients actually have good control. Things like aromatase inhibitors decrease estrogen both in the brain and outside the brain. So it's those later patients. And we know from the TROPIC study that this works for hormone receptor positive disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I think you should proceed on with working on the amendment, Andrew, with Alicia.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next update, which is 1706 by Dr. Jaxie, and I believe she's also online.
I am. Hello.
Hi.
So
This is our phase 2 randomized trial of a PARP inhibitor being administered at a low radiosensitizing dose concurrently with radiation therapy versus radiation therapy alone for inflammatory breast cancer. Patients receive the standard of care neoadjuvant chemotherapy, modified radical mastectomy, and then are randomized to receive either the PARP inhibitor together with radiotherapy to the chest wall and regional nodes, or just standard radiotherapy to the regional nodes and chest wall. Our goal accrual for this trial is 300 patients. Our accrual goal was 5 patients a month for 5 years. We're really not hitting that 5 patients a month. In recent months, we're seeing, 3 patients a month. Again, recognizing that this is an uncommon presentation, thankfully, but also a very important one. And this really is the only big national trial that is available for this patient population. It's an interesting question. There are correlative questions also being asked and led by Dr. Corey Spears, and some really important work that can be done if we accrue to this trial. We're at 109, a little over a third of the way through, and would just really ask if we can try to encourage accrual to this. I will be sending a message to PIs at the various sites, if you will forgive me for filling your inboxes, just to remind you of the existence of this trial. I know that you don't run into these patients very often, but there are 172 sites that are approved. And so if we can, just even get one patient from each site, we would finish this trial. So it would be great if people could just keep their eyes open for patients to accrue to this trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma. The next one's yours too, MA39 or Taylor RT.
Yep. And so this is the trial of using a biomarker to help us select patients for regional nodal radiotherapy. And it used to be entitled Biomarker Low Risk Node Positive Patients, but now it's, of course, retitled Biomarker Low Risk Node Positive and T3N0 patients, because there was an amendment. And the only reason for the red line below is just to show you that we amended eligibility. And I told you about this the last time we met. But basically, we have expanded eligibility to allow T3N0 disease, micrometastases, to extend the timing windows between surgery or chemotherapy and radiation therapy, just to make it easier to accrue to this trial. The trial is nearly 50% accrued, as you can see there, 935 of 2140 patients as of the end of August, and relatively small numbers of patients being formally attributed to SWOG. And so I think that's partly because many of our members are medical oncologists. Many of our members are at sites where people tend to assign credit for what seem like radiation oncology trials through other groups. But I would encourage you in any case to continue disseminating this study. This is actually, I'll tell you in my radiotherapy update, but I'll just tell you now that I'm at Astro right now to present our results from S1 secondary radiation use analysis. This is the trial that is the concluding slide of that presentation. This is the trial that our results in S1 strongly suggest needs to be conducted. And so we really should be a group that is encouraging enrollment on this trial. So thank you for your ongoing collaboration on that.
Thank you, Dr. Jaxi. Next, we have COMPASS HER2 studies, and this is the COMPASS PCR. Dr. Tang?
Good morning. This is dose de-escalation neoadjuvant anti-HER2 therapy trial, and the schema is here. And as you see, all the patient will receive the PTH 4 cycles pre-op. Then after surgery, if they have PCR, this is the dose de-escalation part. They will continue to just receive biologics only without chemotherapy of 1 year of HP. Those who have the PCR, who did not have the PCR, will go on to be re-randomized to either TDM1 for 14 cycles or TDM1 plus tucatinib for 14 doses. So right now, the trial has opened up in February 2020. As of this month, there are 1592 patients enrolled out of the target number of 2156. Alliance has entered 337, ECOG Akron enrolled 914, and NRG 251, and SWOG is unfortunately lagging behind, and we enrolled about 90. So right now the current approval rate per month is about 35 patients per month, and the estimated completion date is February 28, 2023. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. So looks like the trial's doing very well and ahead of target in completing accrual. The partner to this study, the Compass HER2 residual disease, Dr. Murthy is our champion. I'm not sure she's on. If not, I will just present on her behalf. So this is taking patients who have residual disease and randomizing them to standard TDM1 with placebo versus TDM1 with tucatinib for 14 cycles. The trial was activated in January of last year and has enrolled 247 of the 1,031 target enrollment, and was also activated in Canada by CCTG earlier this year. And there's some amendments that are coming up or were just approved in terms of not requiring ALND in patients with micro and macrometastasis, providing some more guidance there, and including patients with weekly ER PR 1 to 10% node negative disease. Earlier, it was required to be a higher percentage. So the next one we have is NR GBR 007, which I think, Reshma, I think you're presenting that because Dean could not be on the call.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. And so this is our trial of biomarker low risk patients who've had breast conserving surgery with node negative disease, early stage disease, stage 1 disease, who can be candidates for consideration of omission of radiation treatment. And this is a younger patient population than those in whom it is standard of care to offer omission. And they're being randomized to receiving radiation therapy as well as endocrine therapy or endocrine therapy alone after their lumpectomy surgeries. And so that trial is already at 231 of its 1,714 patients. But Dean has noted to me that none of the accruals have yet been credited to SWOG. And again, I think that is likely representing the fact that our members are encouraging our patients to enroll on this trial, but then the credits are probably going in via NRG. I don't think we need to be bean counting the number of accruals, but what I want to emphasize is, of course, that this is an extraordinarily important opportunity for us to potentially identify an option that many patients would embrace to reduce the toxicity and burden of treatment if it proves to be appropriately effective, but we really need the information in this population of patients who are over age 50, but not quite at the CALGB 9343 or prime 2 age yet. So please enroll to this trial as well, and let me or Dean know if you'd like to hear anything to be helpful with that.
Thank you. Looks like it's on to a good start since it was still within the first year or so. The next one is 1507, and Dr. Floyd. Justin, are you online? Not, I will pretend to be him. So this is prospective evaluation of carvedilol in prevention of cardiac toxicity in patients with metastatic HER2 positive breast cancer. Patients are randomized to receive carvedilol or no intervention. It's pretty broad eligibility as long as, they're planning to receive some HER2 therapy and are on it, no restriction on lines of therapy. This slide provides accrual, and it looks like it's 283 out of the planned 817 total accrual. And the new amendment will allow HER2 low patients as long as they're receiving HER2 therapy that is associated with some cardiac toxicity. The next one is S1703, which is randomized non-inferiority trial comparing overall survival in patients monitored with serum marker disease monitoring versus usual care in setting of metastatic hormone-positive breast cancer. Melissa, I don't think is online also due to travel and childcare issues. So this trial has been open for a while, and step 1 registration thus far is 360 out of 1320, with step 2 registration of 235 out of the planned 1056 total enrollment. This trial has had several prior amendments to allow flexibility in the number of tumor markers assessed and other things. So hopefully that has helped with the enrollment. The next one is EA1183, and Hannah, are you presenting or Jen?
Yeah, I'm online and happy to talk about it.
Yes.
So this is the feature trial, is our bone dominant trial, and in the theme with disparities here, this is allowing patients who've never had a chance to be in a clinical trial to be in a trial, and for us to develop a PET-based response criteria so these patients can continue to participate in trial. And this is going quite well. We're over halfway through enrollment, and this is the study schema. I think the eligible is on the next slide. So these are people who really only have disease in bone. If you have measurable disease or other pleural peritoneal disease, they're not included. And they can have multiple lines of treatment, but not entirely nth line. And then the last slide shows an upcoming amendment that we have to get a little more data with ctDNA, and also with an extra PET scan, all paid for by an R01 to Dr. Specht and ECOG Akron. So we appreciate everybody's participation here.
And an upcoming amendment will make the blood collection mandatory, it appears, at the 3 times.
Yeah, because we're so close to finalizing accrual, and we want to get this subgroup analysis done.
Sounds good. Thank you. The next is TMIS. Dr. Arun is still here? Yes.
Still here. So this is the ECOG Akron study. Please. Very briefly, this is a randomized prospective trial in asymptomatic women who undergo screening mammograms between ages 45 and 75 with no previous breast cancer. Patients are randomized to either breast digital mammography. The one previous slide, the accrual number was decreased to 129,000. And 76,000. Going better, sorry. All right. Any questions?
So it looks like based on the new accrual numbers, halfway through, or a little over halfway through.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I think it's picking up.
Yes, thank you. Next, we have 3 studies that are not quite open yet, but we anticipate they will be available to all of us before our spring meeting. So we have the PIs giving just a sneak peek at this. The first is 2010, Aspen.
Yeah, hi, so this is a new R01 funded study. We're calling it Aspen. It's active symptom monitoring in young women with breast cancer with the goal of increasing persistence with endocrine therapy. Planned activation is in December. Next slide. So active symptom monitoring you might be familiar with for metastatic disease, but this is basically frequent assessment of patients' symptoms, typically between clinic visits. So our hypothesis is that we will increase persistence with endocrine therapy in young women with high-risk breast cancer, partly by increasing patient-provider communication, which would then lead to reducing toxicity and improved quality of life. This is not a symptom management trial. This is really trying to help improve persistence. Next slide. So our objectives, we want to investigate the impact of active symptom monitoring on persistence over 18 months. And secondarily, we're looking at treatment emergent symptoms. We're looking at 2 different measures of adherence, including both patient-reported and blood. And then we're building a risk model of non-persistence with endocrine therapy so we can learn more about those factors, and also want to identify which patients are most likely to benefit from active symptom monitoring. So for eligibility, which is really the key, so you have to be premenopausal at the time of diagnosis. If you're premenopausal when you're diagnosed and then you undergo a bilateral self-pinga oophorectomy, you would still be eligible. You do have to be planning concurrent endocrine therapy, either tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitor, as well as ovarian suppression or ablation. And the reason is because these are really the highest risk patients, both for disease recurrence as well as for non-persistence with therapy. And that can be one of three different things. You can be giving concurrent gaserelin or leuprolide, and that can be either every 4 or every 12 weeks. Patients can undergo surgery, or if you have a patient who undergoes chemotherapy and develops ovarian failure, that patient would be eligible with endocrine therapy alone, as long as your plan is to initiate ovarian suppression or ablation if she experiences ovarian function recovery. Patients are allowed to enroll up to 2 weeks before planned initiation of endocrine therapy, or if they've already started, you have a 2-week window to enroll the patient after they've started endocrine therapy. Next slide. So if you're starting someone on tamoxifen, they just can't have had prior tamoxifen for chemo prevention. Similarly for AI therapy, but if you have a patient who previously had letrozole for fertility treatment, that would be eligible. And we're allowing concurrent treatment with almost everything, radiation, anti-HER2, Zometa, PARP, CDK4/6. We're just not allowing concurrent participation in the therapeutic clinical trial. Patients do have to have internet access or be willing to use IVRS, and I'll explain that in a second, have to understand either English or Spanish, and are not planning to become pregnant during 18 months. So it's really just standard of care visits every 12 weeks for a year and a half, and then 1 follow-up phone call at 80 weeks. So this is designed to match up entirely with typical standard of care. Patients are randomized 1-to-1 either to patient education plus this intervention, which I'll describe in a second, versus patient education alone. And so really what happens is the patient will get a text message or will get an email or a phone call to say, please answer these 6 questions. And it's 6 individual questions about those 6 symptoms that are up there, typical side effects for endocrine therapy. They'll answer the questions. If they report severe or very severe toxicity or symptoms, or if they have an increase of at least 2 points on that 5-point scale, then it'll trigger an alert. But if they have no increase, the site won't hear about the patient at all, and it'll just circle back to the next week. The patient gets the questionnaire again, and so you get the questionnaires weekly for 24 weeks, and then every 4 weeks for 48 weeks. Next slide.
Can I just interject and ask, so it's one single time point increase, or is it 2 consecutive, like, so 1 time point, 2?
One single time point increase. So then if you do have that 1 single point increase, so if you go from no hot flashes to mild hot flashes to moderate hot flashes, that's a 1-to-1-to-1 increase, so that will not trigger. It's only if you have you jump up 2 full points that you trigger or go to severe. Then the site will receive a notification. At the time of that notification, there'll be an email that gets sent to the study coordinator that basically says, your patient on the study had an alertable symptom. Please notify your clinical team. They will then forward that email along with the patient information, because we don't have that, to the clinical team that then says, this patient reported hot flashes. And then what the study site is supposed to do is, if they feel they should reach out to the patient, they can do that. If they feel they don't need to, because they know the patient always has hot flashes, they don't need to. And then they can do whatever intervention they think is appropriate. And so we just want very simple documentation. Did you try to reach the patient, yes or no? Did you reach the patient, yes or no? And did you recommend an intervention? And if so, there'll be a drop-down menu for what things they did. And we're creating some information so that it can be easily documented in the medical record and in RAVE. We are not directing symptom management at all. That is entirely up to the clinicians. All patients on the study, regardless of which arm you're in, will complete patient-reported outcomes on paper at baseline and every 12 weeks, so that lines up with the clinic visits. We do have optional but highly encouraged blood draws 4 times, and that's to look at estradiol concentrations, especially on patients who are on the GnRH agonist, as well as adherence measures looking at drug concentrations and metabolites, sorry. And I think I have one more slide. So the primary endpoint is discontinuation for at least 60 days, so 2 months, or switching to a different endocrine therapy for any reason. But as I said, we're not dictating which endocrine therapy you use. We're not dictating which method of ovarian suppression or ablation. We're not dictating any sort of dose or schedule adjustments for any of the treatments, and we're not dictating how to manage the patient's symptoms. So as I said, this is an R01 funded study. It is open across NCTN, across NCORE, and across SLAE. And we actually have a CIRB approval. The only thing we have left is to finalize the intervention and all of the training materials, which is not an easy task, and we plan to activate in December. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is randomized at the patient level, and so any site is able to participate. It's not a limited institution site or study or anything like that, so anyone is welcome to participate.
And they will get SWOG credit for it. It's CP credit, prevention.
Yeah, it's an NCORE study,
NCORE
so
study.
it depends on what you are as to what credit you get.
Okay, thank you. So this is an important study for our patients and will address some provide us some useful information about how we can improve adherence and persistence, especially during the first year and a half of endocrine therapy. Okay, so the next new and upcoming study that we will look at is the NRGBR008 or the HERO trial, and our champion for that is Dr. Connolly, and I believe she's also online.
Yes, I'm here. So this is a new trial that is scheduled to open in the first quarter of 2000.
Can you get closer to your microphone?
Sure, sorry about that. So this is a new phase 3 randomized trial of radiation optimization for low-risk breast cancer that's going to open in early 2023. So next slide shows you eligibility. This study is for HER2 positive breast cancer. There are 2 cohorts. The adjuvant cohort are for women with lesions less than 2 centimeters in size that are node negative and undergo upfront surgery with sentinel lymph node biopsy, and then go on to receive adjuvant chemotherapy and HER2-directed therapy. The other cohort is women with lesions up to 3 centimeters in size that are clinically node negative who undergo neoadjuvant HER2-directed chemotherapy, then undergo a breast-conserving surgery with a sentinel or axillary lymph node dissection and have a complete pathologic response. Next slide, please. So the intervention, all patients that are stratified based on age, tumor size, estrogen receptor status, and systemic therapy sequence, and they're then randomized in a 1-to-1 fashion to either receive standard whole breast radiation with or without a boost at the physician's discretion, continuing with HER2-directed therapy and hormone receptor therapy as per physician discretion, or in the intervention arm, no radiation therapy, just continuation of HER2 therapy and hormonal therapy. Next slide, please. So this study, to summarize, the primary outcome is going to be a 7-year recurrence-free interval. The idea is to optimization of radiation therapy, that it may not be, to demonstrate that this is a non-inferior option to avoid radiation therapy and de-escalation. And this should be, the protocol is being finalized now, so they're hoping to open it in January, but it should be early in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Aline, for the sneak peek. So please look out for this study. There are many patients with, these small HER2-positive tumors that we're treating adjuvantly and neoadjuvantly, and certainly we've come a long way in de-escalating therapy in these patients. Now time to look at de-escalating local therapy as well for these patients. The next one is NRGBR009. Go ahead. Yes, please, Phil.
On that last study, they're going to be able to be a part of it if they were part of the ECOG neoadjuvant study and got past CR?
That's a good question, Eileen. The study team, I'm sure, has thought of it. So the COMPASS PCR study, could the patients have participated in that and then go on to this study to now avail the opportunity of omitting radiation?
That's my understanding. I will clarify for the meeting, but I believe that is true.
The COMPASS PCR is slated to complete accrual by spring of next year, so hopefully the overlap will be very few months. BR009.
Yes, so this is a study, a phase 3 randomized study, looking at ovarian suppression plus endocrine therapy plus or minus chemotherapy in a premenopausal patient with node positive, node negative disease. Next slide. As we know in TAILOR-X, TAILOR-X showed a subpopulation of premenopausal patients who appear to have clinical benefit from chemotherapy. This study is trying to answer the question whether or not those patients would have benefited equally from maximizing ovarian suppression. Also looking at the RxPonder data, again, that showed that patients with node positive premenopausal had benefit regardless of their recurrence score. This study is also looking at whether or not there's a population of patients there for whom ovarian suppression maximization of the anti-estrogen therapy with ovarian suppression would be of benefit. Next slide. So the schema here, again, premenopausal patient, hormone receptor positive, node negative with recurrence score from 16 to 25, or node positive with recurrence score from 0 to 25. They're stratified by node status, recurrence score, age, and they're randomized to receive chemotherapy plus ovarian suppression and aromatase inhibitor versus aromatase inhibitor. Next. Primary and secondary objective. Primary objective is invasive breast cancer-free survival. We do have other objective of invasive disease-free survival, ovarian survival, overall survival, to determine if adjuvant chemotherapy adds to long-term toxicity of ovarian suppression, to identify biomarkers of predictive chemotherapy efficacy, and to evaluate the differences in symptoms and health-related quality of life among the two treatment arms.
And I think this is sometime in spring,
yes,
perhaps?
So this is first quarter of 2023, and they're anticipating about a little over 3,900 patients.
So it's a pretty large trial, and again, will address many questions that were raised by both TAILOR-Rx and our own RxPonder trial. Erin.
Just a question, I'm assuming allowed, but I just saw with the study schema, it said 5 years of endocrine therapy is extended, ET allowed 10 years.
Yes.
And I think so would be the CDK4/6. Yes.
Abemaciclib is also
allowed. Yeah, I think at least you have to commit to 5 years. That is at least how much would be recommended. So we move on to our last section, which is reports from our committee liaisons, and Dr. Arun wanted to go first, so she will give us an update on the prevention from the prevention committee.
Thank you so much, because I have to leave. I'm looking at the title. It's a long title. It's S1904. PI is Kathy Crew. This is a cluster randomized controlled trial of patients and provider decision support to increase chemo prevention informed choice among women with atypical ductal hyperplasia and lobular carcinoma in situ. That's the official title. Accrual is going well in terms of patient accrual. 215 out of 415 were recruited, and amongst physicians, out of 200, 159 were recruited. So it's going pretty well.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Maman from the surgery committee.
My apologies for being late. I was at the surgery committee, which meets at the same time, unfortunately. So I perhaps was already covered, but A11202 is closed now. As you know, is temporarily closed, but now it is really permanently closed. So I'll hopefully have some results from that. I'm really excited that at the working group, there were 2 studies that are in development that have really strong surgical questions. So I think that's something for us to look forward to over the next year or two to see how those studies develop. And finally, I want to make the encourage the group to consider surgical endpoints. Already completed trials. There's opportunities for retrospective analysis of already completed trials, and the surgery committee has been quite busy on other disease sites, and I think we have an opportunity for us to do that as well.
So I think we should, a Scarlet protocol is under development. There is no specific surgical endpoint, so please reach out. I mean, breast conservation, mastectomy rates, I mean, we can definitely, that information is collected, so we can build it in as a predefined secondary endpoint.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Update from cancer survivorship. I don't know if Dr. Moore is still here. I saw her earlier today. Many of us have flights to catch today. Everyone wants to get home. I saw Dawn earlier today also, but it seems like we've lost her. Dr. Henry is still here for symptom control and QL updates, and she actually provided slides, so I'm going to pull those up.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a lot going on in our committee. So SWOG 2013 is an observational study for immunotherapy toxicity. This is admittedly less relevant for breast cancer because you have to use ICI without chemotherapy. But if you do have any patients who are on pembrolizumab alone, for example, they would be potentially eligible. This is just looking at so we can understand more about immune-related adverse events. So it's collecting patient-reported outcomes and toxicity data and some blood samples. S1714 is our closed observational study for taxane neuropathy. I just wanted to mention that there will be an oral presentation at San Antonio describing the findings specifically in the breast group. And also we've already heard about the R01, heard about the 1007 updates. And then also, just so you know, that in acupuncture for AI arthralgia study S1200, there was a manuscript recently accepted to JAMA Network Open. And then the only other upcoming study I wanted to make people aware of is S2205. This is planned to activate in January. It's cryocompression therapy for CIPN prevention, so it's testing 2 different levels of compression versus compression along with cold. For preventing neuropathy. There are 25 sites who are participating in this. If you are one of those sites, you know who you are, but we look forward to seeing the results of that study.
Thank you. Go back to the slide. Dr. Lammers, if you can provide us update from NCORE.
Yeah, at our NCORE meetings, we have been talking a lot about DEI issues, and I think given the heterogeneity of the NCORE sites across the country, it's very different when we talk about equity and diversity amongst our groups. So I think there's really a lot of room to synergize. I'd love to talk with you more about getting involved in your work to make sure that we're not only looking at racial ethnic minorities and how they're different, in Hawaii and New York and Memphis, but also talking about other disparities, rurality, socioeconomic issues and everything. I think there's just a lot of room to really work on those issues from a community perspective. So we've been talking a lot about that. And then of course, staffing issues always comes up and varies a lot place to place around the country. But every place is having their issues, but it seems to be at least a little bit on better footing, I think, now than it was 6 months ago, potentially.
Thank you, and we appreciate all the support from the NCORE sites for enrollments, especially to some of our bread and butter type of trials. Gayatri, do you want to give us the last few words before we end the session?
Sure. So as DEI champion for breast, we've been engaged in spreading the word for our DEI methodologies among the investigators. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to the audience today. We will be reviewing all of your responses and making recommendations to the leadership. In addition, we reviewed all the portfolio of the ongoing studies in breast cancer space, and it was determined at a committee level that to apply these methodologies and operationalize, it would be better to use one of the upcoming newer studies. So I look forward to working with the PIs for the upcoming studies. There's many other activities planned at the level of the DEI committee, including creating tools and resources and partnership with community to operationalize some of the proposed activities. So thank you.
Thank you. And that actually was our last remark. We actually finished a little bit early so people can mad rush to the airport to catch their respective flights. Lars, do you have any comments?
Thank you all of you for sticking to the bitter end and being the last event in the meeting. So thank you for staying on. And also would like to thank our online participants who actually dedicated their morning to participate in the meeting virtually. And special thanks to Priyanka for actually putting together the slides and really doing the heavy lifting for organizing our events. And of course, I need to really acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that Alicia Aranda and Kat Gassick, our protocol coordinators, are putting into our studies and try to operationalize and make all the ideas that we discuss and that happen. So Alicia, I know that you are online, and I would like to personally thank you for all the work that you put into the breast committee. And have a safe flight home.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.